This is a poem that started out when I discovered that D.H. Lawrence had spent some time in Dover. Did you know that? He really did. D.H. Lawrence spent the month of August in 1923 in Union Hill. Somebody lent him a farmhouse, and Lawrence stayed there finishing up his book of poems called Birds, Beasts, and Flowers, and reading the proofs of his novel called Kangaroo. All that came out of Dover, New Jersey. I came across this fact in the book called D.H. Lawrence, A Composite Biography, which contains some letters that Lawrence wrote during the summer he spent in Dover. This was long before Lady Chatterley's Lover. But Lawrence didn't like New York. He had seen New York, and he said he regarded New York as a big, stupid city. So he was glad to get to Dover, New Jersey for the month of August because he regarded it as green and fresh. But after Lawrence spent a month in Dover, he got sort of turned off. And writing to a friend, he said on the 14th of August, 1923, "These people are quenched. I mean the natives." As a native of Dover, New Jersey, I was rather teed off by that rather snotty remark. And I got thinking of how the natives of Dover weren't quenched, especially as far as I could see. So I tried to recollect my own boyhood when I didn't think I had been quenched. And I was thinking of a couple of other things too. I was reading at the moment the famous sonnet by Mallarmé, in which Mallarmé writes about a swan whose feet get frozen into ice. This is one of the most famous sonnets in French, you know, the sonnet that begins, "Le vierge, le vivace, et le belle aujourd'hui," the beautiful, virginal, vivacious present moment. And Mallarmé writes about this swan who's got its feet frozen in ice. And this is a big symbol. Anybody who studies French symbolism has to wrestle with Mallarmé's swan with its feet locked in ice. What does that swan locked in ice suggest? Is it the mortal condition to be trapped in the physical world, yearning toward the great beyond, the sky, futilely beating your wings? Is it the condition of the poet? That's one of the standard interpretations of Mallarmé's poem, that the swan with his feet locked in ice is like the poet yearning toward the great beyond. Well, thinking back to my Dover boyhood, I recall that we had literally swans with their feet locked in ice in Dover. Every year, Dover had two swans when I was growing up as a kid near Herd Park. And every year, the swans would get frozen into the ice. The dumb bastards, they would just sit there while the ice froze around them, and the Dover Fire Department would come and chop them loose. Yeah. So this is just to fill you in a little bit on the backgrounds of the poem, which is a sort of memory of what it was like to grow up in Dover as a fledgling poet. So, poets, what were they like as schoolboys? Long on themes and short of wind, perpetually outclassed, breaking their glasses, always chosen last, when everyone was sorted out in teams. Moody, a little dull, the kind that squirmed at hurt cats, shrank from touching cracked up birds, with all but plain girls at a loss for words, having to ask to have their fish hooks wormed. Snuffers of candles every priest thought nice, quenchers of their own wicks, their eyes turned down and smoldering. In Dover, my hometown, no winter passed, but we had swans and ice. Birds of their quill, so beautiful, so dumb, they'd let a window glaze around their feet, not seeing through their dreams till it was time to eat. A fireman with a blowtorch had to come thaw the dopes loose. Sun-silvered plumes aflap, weren't they grand though? Not that you'd notice it. Crawling along a ladder, getting bit, numb to the bone, enduring all their crap.
I guess one of the reasons that I couldn't write poems about myself when I was a young person was that I was not a good student when I was in school. I remember that my teachers used to call my parents in, and they would say, Paul is a dreamer. It's a bad thing to be, a dreamer. It was a real kind of social stigma in many ways. We all know that we feel these kind of pressures. If we don't get good grades in school, why we feel it publicly and privately. But I was, I guess, in some ways too self-indulgent to do the work. I didn't have the ability to swallow all the things necessary and barf them back up on test papers, and consequently I got bad grades. And I have some bitterness about this. It's went on all through my school years, even when I was in college. I'm probably the only published poet in the English language who ever flunked freshman English 3 times in a row. I did do that. But now I edit scholarly manuscripts, so you can see there's hope for everybody. But I made a poem about my school years. And it's actually a poem about my grade school years. And it's called, but it means much more than this. It's called Zimmer in Grade School. In grade school, I wondered why I had been born to wrestle in the ashy puddles with my square nose streaming mucus and blood, my knuckles puffed from combat and the old nun's ruler. I feared everything, God, learning, and my schoolmates. I could not count, spell, or read. My report card proclaimed these scarlet failures. My parents wrung their loving hands. My guardian angel wept constantly. But I could never hide anything. If I peed my pants in class, the puddle was always quickly evident. My worst mistakes were at the blackboard for Jesus and all the saints to see. And even now, when I hide behind elaborate mask, it is always known that I am Zimmer, the one who does the messy papers and fractures all his crayons, who spits upon the radiators and sits all day in shame outside the office of the principal. This is a poem. I like animals. My favorite animal is, aside from dogs, is an elephant. I like elephants. So I made this poem called Zimmer Envying Elephants. I have a wide, friendly face like theirs, yet I can't hang my nose like a fractured arm, nor flap my dishpan ears. I can't curl my canine teeth and swing my tail like a filthy tassel, nor make thunder without lightning. But I'd like to thud amply around for 100 years or more, stuffing an occasional treetop into my mouth, screwing hugely for hours at a time, gaining weight and slowly growing a few hairs. Once in a while, I'd charge a power pole or smash a wall down just to keep everybody loose and at a distance.
Mama. I read Love Without Fear on the toilet. I'm 8. I hear them fighting. No is a tight bracelet. It closes my legs together near the Episcopal Church where Doug's lips brush my heart. If a girl lets a man put his tongue in her teeth, she'll let him do anything. Page 17 drifts up out of that bathroom through the chestnuts. No taped on my camp clothes, on the crotch of jeans so tight I can't button them. It was in my bed, all that marriage. No, it hurts. The nutmeg makes me dizzy. No, I can't. Who's heard of living in the trees with a wanted poet? No, David, I can't go to California. No, Fatimi, the white slave market, the Arab leaves. No, Paul, I wouldn't in the lilacs. Mama, don't always keep talking of how people are talking. I'm not 15 and don't worry that the man with a hat won't want to marry as a wife. For years, I couldn't leave the man who wouldn't let me dance and laughed at my singing. You wonder what kind of a woman sleeps around, rum in her pocketbook, salve. The first time I said yes was in a locked room on paper. Yes, I would to the man in another town, but what if I'm frigid? How could he? Listen, this is not so bad, Mama. Don't worry about the man with super dope on his lips. He wants to kiss my eyes, my ass, shove no out of me with his you know what. Mama, it's okay. Love, Lyn.
So I've never gone skydiving, but I can imagine what it's like, and I thought it was an interesting image for some stuff I was working on. And I grabbed this right off the tube. I don't believe you have to go to some esoteric place, to find symbols and images for poetry. I'm not a gentleman gardener, I hate bugs. So I wrote skydiving, and the quote comes from Burt Lancaster's line on a TV show, and it's got the name of the movie. I think it was Skydiving. It's done by Frankenheimer. But anyway, it's a good way to live and a good way to die. From a Frankenheimer video about skydiving. The hero telling why he liked to. The following noon he leaped, but his parachute wasn't with him. He spread out on the field like scrambled eggs. Life is not always high-lifing. Inside Archibald Motley's Chicken Shack. You and your derby, your honey in her beret, styling before a small vintage car, let alone a bowl of cherries. Like too many of us, I am a man who never had much use for a real father. And so when I'm heading for a crash, no one will catch me but me. The year is only 5 days old. Already a comet has glittered out its glow, sandbagged by a jealous sun. Happens to the best of us, our brilliance falling off like hair from Berkeley's roving dogs. Even on Rose Bowl Day, an otherwise joyous occasion, a float veered into the crowd. Somebody got bruised over the incident, like a love affair on 2nd Avenue. It's a good lesson to us all in these downhill days of a hard-hearted decade, jetting through the whirl, our tails on fire. You can't always count on things opening up for you. Know when to let go. Learn how to fall. This is another one I grabbed off the tube. I was looking at this Boris Karloff thing, And this one that comes back all the time. You might see it about this old woman who engages people into a mirror in a haunted house. And I call it Beware, Do Not Read This Poem, which means that guarantees the reader will read it, right? You see something, you'll read it. Tonight, Thriller was about an old woman so vain, she surrounded herself with many mirrors. It got so bad, that finally she locked herself indoors, and her whole life became the mirrors. One day, the villagers broke into her house, but she was too swift for them. She disappeared into a mirror. Each tenant who bought the house after that lost a loved one to the old woman in the mirror. First, a little girl, then a young woman, then a young woman's husband. The hunger of this poem is legendary. It has taken in many victims. Back off from this poem. It is drawn in your feet. Back off from this poem. It is drawn in your legs. Back off from this poem. It is a greedy mirror. You are into this poem from the waist down. Nobody can hear you, can they? This poem has had you up to here. Belch, this poem ain't got no manners. You can't call out from this poem. Relax now and go with this poem. Move and roll on to this poem. Do not resist this poem. This poem has your eyes. This poem has his head. This poem has his arm. This poem has his fingers. This poem has his fingertips. The poem is a reader, and the reader this poem. Statistic. The United States Bureau of Missing Persons reports that in 1968 over 100,000 people disappeared, leaving no solid clues, no trace, only a space in the lives of their friends.
This is called Seeing Off a Friend. Early April on Broadway, south of Union Square. A man jumps from the 20th floor. I stop him at the 10th. Tell me, I say, what have you learned in your travels? We sit and rest a while. I have only just asked the question, he says. The answer will come to me later. He smiles shyly and continues falling to the 5th floor, where I stop him again. Tell me, I say, what have you learned in your travels? He smiles again, being basically cheerful, but shakes his head. These answers are slow in approaching, he says. Perhaps it is too soon to tell. Beneath us, the crowd is clamoring for his arrival. They shout and clap their hands in unison. They would sing songs of welcome if they knew them. They would beat drums. I shrug and let him continue. He falls, twisting silently. He nicks a streetlight, smashing it. He hits the hood of a blue Chevrolet, smashing it. He bounces 30 feet and hits a parking meter, smashing it. He lies there as people run toward him. Their hands are open like shopping bags. Their mouths are open like pits in the earth. All his answers cover their faces.
A passage in here that's right out of The Origin of Species, which I'll tell you now so that when you come to it, you'll know it's him and not me. The quotation is, "Not one living species will transmit its unaltered likeness to a distant futurity." You couldn't write that in the 20th century. It's wonderful 19th century prose. It's 20th century poetry. The poem is called The Skeletons of Gods. He found giants in the earth, mastodon, mylodon, thigh bones like tree trunks, megatherium, skulls big as boulders. Once in this savage country, treetops trembled at their passing. But their passing was silent as snails, silent as rabbits. Nothing at all recorded the day when the last of them came crashing through creepers and ferns, shaking the earth like pudding a final time, leaving behind them crickets, monkeys, and mice. For think, at last it is nothing to be a giant. The dream of an ending stalks tortoise and toxodon, troubles the lust of the sparrow and saber-toothed tiger, disturbs the deep sleep of the woodchuck and the bear. Back home in his English garden, the young man paused in his pacing, writing it down in italics in the book at the back of his mind. Not one living species will transmit its unaltered likeness to a distant futurity. So at last, we are kin to the giants. After all our millions of years of developing thumbs and cortex, and after the thousands of years of writing our clumsy epic, we know we are mortal as mammoths. We know the last lines of our poem. And somewhere in curving space, beyond our constellations, nebulae burn in their universal law. Nothing out there ever knew that on one sky-blue planet we all dreamed that terrible dream. They have their own dreams, the stars, blazing along through black nothing to nowhere at all, mastodons of heaven lumbering to some distant absolute zero. The stars do not need our small ruin. They have their own dream of an ending.
I'll now read a very short poem that could be almost anywhere. It happened to be in Brazil, but it could be anywhere. And you will see the ending has to be changed, and I welcome any suggestions to change it. It's called Filling Station. Oh, but it's dirty. This little filling station, oil-soaked, oil-permeated, to disturbing overall black translucency. Be careful with that match. A father wears a dirty, oil-soaked monkey suit that cuts him under the arms, and several quick and saucy and greasy sons assist him to family filling station, all quite thoroughly dirty. Do they live in the station? It has a cement porch behind the pumps, and on it a set of crushed and grease-impregnated wickerwork. On the wicker sofa, a dirty dog, quite comfy. Some comic books provide the only note of color, of certain color. They lie upon a big tin doily, draping a tabaret, part of the set, beside a big hirsute begonia. Why the extraneous plant? Why the tabaret? Why the doily? Embroidered in daisy stitch with marguerites, I think, and heavy with gray crochet. Somebody embroidered the doily, somebody waters the plant, or oils it maybe. Somebody arranges the rows of cans so that they softly say, "eso, so, so, so," to high-strung automobiles. Somebody loves us all. So you see, that has to be changed. I don't know.
The first one I want to read is one that always dates itself very easily for me, because I wrote it when my first child was born, who has a birthday every April, and therefore the poem has a birthday every April or May or something like that. It was a rather quick one to write. This is a poem of which the title and the first line are the same, so rather than repeating it and seeming to stutter, I will just say the poem. My son, my executioner, I take you in my arms, quiet and small and just astir, and whom my body warms. Sweet death, small son, our instrument of immortality, your cries and hungers document our bodily decay. We 25 and 22, who seem to live forever, observe enduring life in you, and start to die together.
I knew an old man when I was a boy. My hometown is called Martins Ferry, Ohio, and it's still, I understand, a comparatively small place. I knew an old man when I was a boy, and his name was Francis Leonard. Francis Leonard was known to everyone as Minigan. I don't know why. He was one of those old people who seemed to get smaller all the time. Some old people seem to shrink. Another thing about him is that he had drunk a good deal of booze in his life, and it seemed to just eat away his brain or something. And It was one of those strange cases where everyone wanted to sort of take care of him. And sometimes he would get caught in a sort of daze, stand staring at something for hours. And if you went up to him and asked him if he was all right, the only thing anyone ever heard him say was, "God bless my soul." Well, okay, he's a town drunk, but I've heard people say other things worse than that. One evening, some friends and I found him standing. It was starting to snow, and we thought we'd better take him home. We did. I was about 12 years old. And we took Minigan home. We took him to a place where he and his brother Jimmy lived. What actually happened was that Jimmy was there. We were a little afraid of him, but we took Minigan there, and everything was all right. He didn't stand out by the river and get pneumonia or whatever. When I tried to think about this years afterward, I tried to write it from the point of view of the 12-year-old kid I was and change things around a little bit. Yeah, but, well, the poem is called "A Note Left in Jimmy Leonard's Shack." Near the dry river's watermark, we found your brother Minigan, flopped like a fish against the muddy ground. Beanie, the kid whose yellow hair turns green, told me to find you, even in the rain, and tell you he was drowned. I hid behind the chassis on the bank, the wreck of someone's Ford. No. I was afraid to come and wake you drunk. You told me once the waking up was hard, the daylight beating at you like a board. Blood in my stomach sank. Besides, you told him never to go out along the riverside, drinking and singing, clattering about. You might have thrown a rock at me and cried, I was to blame. I let him fall in the road and pitch down on his side. Well, I'll get hell enough when I get home for coming up this far, leaving the note and running as I came. I'll go and tell my father where you are. You better go find Minigan before policemen hear and come. Beanie went home and I got sick and ran. You old son of a bitch, you better hurry down to Minigan. He's drunk or dying now, I don't know which. Rolled in the roots and garbage like a fish, the poor old man. I would like to read a translation. I'm not sure about how well the translation comes out, but it's a poem that I like very much. It's from the Spanish of Pedro Salinas. Salinas, I believe, addressed almost all of the poems that he ever wrote to his wife. All of his poems are love poems. He's terribly important to me. And I tried to make a version of one of his poems. It's called Not in Marble Palaces. Not in marble palaces, not in months, no, nor in ciphers, never touching ground. In weightless, fragile worlds, we have lived together. Time was beaten out, but hardly by minutes. 1 minute was 100 years, one life, one love. Roofs sheltered us, less than roofs, clouds, less than clouds, heavens, even less, air, nothing. Crossing oceans formed out of 20 tears, 10 yours and 10 mine, we arrived at the golden beads of a necklace, clear islands deserted, without flowers, without bodies, a harbor so tiny, made of glass, for a love that in itself was enough for the largest longing. And we asked neither ships nor time for help. Opening enormous tunnels in grains of sand, we discovered the mines of flames and of chance, and everything hanging from that thread that held up what? That's why our life doesn't appear to be lived. Slippery, evasive, it left behind neither wakes nor footprints. If you want to remember it, don't look where you always look for traces and recollections. Don't look at your soul, your shadow, or your lips. Look carefully into the palm of your hand. It's empty.
The poem is called Winter Love Poem to the Memory of John Keats. And as you may know, Keats died in Italy, in Rome, in February of 1821, at 25 years old. And he died in some rooms which are right next door to the Spanish steps. And there's a beautiful fountain by Bernini at the base of those steps. Perhaps I should say that remind you at any rate that Byron also lived in Italy. He lived in Venice for a while, and there's a reference to him in the poem. Joseph Severin was Keats' great friend who went to Italy with him and who nursed him in his room near the Spanish Steps, and who very reluctantly put on Keats' gravestone the epitaph that Keats asked for, which was, "Here lies one whose name is writ in water." But if you see the actual stone itself, it says, "This grave holds all that was mortal of a young English poet, who in the bitterness of his heart, at the malice of his enemies, desired these words to be engraved on his tombstone. Here lies one whose name is written in water." So Severin did everything he could to qualify that judgment of Keats about himself. And I suppose there are no other references in here that I need to mention, except that there's a reference to a family whose name is Sani, who some friends of ours in Italy who lived in the same building we did when we were there 2 years ago, and whom we went back to visit on a recent trip in January. Well, we'll see. There's a quotation from Keats' letters, which stands as the epigraph to this poem, and it says this: "The truth is, there is something real in the world. Your third chamber of life shall be a lucky and a gentle one, stored with the wine of love and the bread of friendship." And that's Keats said that to Reynolds. Of course, Keats didn't really even get through the first chamber of his life. Your third chamber of life shall be lucky and a gentle one, stored with the wine of love and the bread of friendship. Winter Love Poem to the Memory of Keats. Assisi. This is the first part. Assisi. Here in Assisi, even the winter rainfall falls like a delicate shawl of benediction, and the low westward sun, so late coming out, comes into our room and waits like a patient, superfluous lover for us to wake together and go out walking where the streets become the evening of light. Dear Keats, how many times were you able even to get out of bed and see from your Roman windows the banked fire of azaleas on that stairway, or the water flowering in Bernini's boat of stone? Whenever I read you, you are older than I am. Now you are younger than my younger brother, and I have spent the afternoon in sleep or being wakened by the one breath's rise and fall. And now the sunlight patient in the window calls our names and waits for us to follow. There was one whose name you could not say in Italy, for fear your breath would fan those coals to flame and burn away your breast to nothingness. You could not bear to leave her. You could bear to die. What am I doing here with one whose name I say in starlight and again in winter rainfall, and who answers where we walk together toward the evening of light? It has happened before. The evening of light becomes the darkness, and the darkness will become the morning when we leave Assisi. Feeling so good together, we believe no evil can befall us, even though we saw the great cross of Giotto flying above us in light and then in darkness, even though we saw on the bright postcard they have cut the weeping angel out of the picture.
Here's a poem that I think gives some of the moods of the old 30s. It's written in 19th. Plea of the people. Hear us in our prejudices, listen to us in our special pleading, who would choose warmth and chuckling but fear desolation, world too earnest, in which we cannot be without vast documents. Great understanding is needed if we are but to have shelter. Burden of a state wherein by merely waiting we put misery upon our fellows. See, we have fists, teeth, and searching, calculating eyes. We have the sharpness of tigers about to leap forward, an armory of nerve and muscle. We are all girded by the power of hating. By the jungle we are fitted. Our eyes burn out of dark corners. Leave us but our bodies and our suffering, and we are armed. We are weeping. There is softness and gentleness within us. We would be men of goodwill, bringing gifts to one another. To be strong in hate or to rot in wretchedness. Do not force us to this choice. There is no choice, broken or needing vengeance. Let us use our muscles and our minds in service. With eye, hand, and mental keenness, let us be busied for the good of many. Permit us to have as brothers men whom, if they have are less than brothers, we must vilify and lynch. Please that they pray and combat the jungle state may be abolished into the air all about us, from tenements, streets, marginal farms. We plead for the right of gentleness. Our victors are not happy. Those above us who must seek profit, they cannot, and so must threaten us, or imprison us, or hang us, or burn us in the chair of justice, or goad us to the bewildered conflicts with one another. We have even hoped for the trenches, that men might again be cronies. We have even told ourselves how by the wars we might again be brought together. By the helpfulness of slaughter, the wars are fuller than the peace in fellowship. There's within us a realm of loveliness, a willingness of warmth and chuckling. All that we are as men working together waits within us. We plead that our state may be made in its image. The children may retain their exceptional sweetness. Let us arise like music, many instruments singing in different voices, various designs and timbres, disparate rhythms, one single symphony. Let us be like one chord set vibrant, to which others are also set vibrant. No less can save us, no less than the blaze of glory, our vast uniting. Amen. This poem I often use as an example of a theory of the problem of that people don't realize the nature of poetry, that poems on a page are not the finished product. Poems are like a musical score. They're still to be performed. And the difference between a poem, say, and a piece of and a painting. The painting is the act, the finished act, and you respond to this finished act. But a poem on the page is like a musical score on a page. That's not the performance; it's instructions for performance. And this particular poem of mine, "Lullaby for Oneself as Adult Male," I use as again and again in my talks as an example of that sort of problem to do with poetry, that people are so used to reading, they don't realize that reading is the same as though as you're looking at a score, and if you could hear the music when you look at the score. I'd like to have you think of that, and think that there's quite a difference here between the product, and that's why you see it very definitely. It's like look at the verse in a Shakespeare play, for instance. Obviously, there's nothing there to show you the timing, the time, the ways you raise your voice and this and down and so on and so on. There's nothing there that gives you any of that, and you can see it very clearly in a case like that. But I think it's true of all works of that sort. You cannot make the eye behave on a page. Here's a poem that I think an eye reader could read. It's only 10 lines long. I think an eye reader could read it in at least 3 seconds. I think it comes to close to about 40 seconds to be read correctly. It's called Lullaby for Oneself as Adult Male. First you start out the suggestion of giving, little nonsense and going off into sleep and such as the prayer and so on. The rest of the poem, I think, becomes quite clear. Lullaby for Oneself as Adult Male. Or soft, the gentling, soft you smoothly on, in bringing in compliance to a way, the going ought to go and gone. Give us, forgive this unforgiving day. The undulance from objects into mind. Yes, no, a patient tick, death, talk. Here is the past and future intertwined, each man the key and everything locked. Child of the centuries, sleep, sweet bearded darling, sleep.
Boom, boom, heartbeats, boom, 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 bum 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 bum. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What a hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp? There its deadly terrors clasp. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry?
Throw in a real brief song that won't take too much endurance, called Song to the Tune of Somebody Stole My Gal. The tune of this is the old Dixieland jazz number, and the inspiration for the thing came when I was talking one day with a poet with a beautiful name of W.D. Snodgrass, very good poet, Snodgrass was talking about people who had lost their religious faith and who bored everybody else with how painful it was to be robbed of their myths by this cruel world of technology. You know, that's a pitch that you hear sometimes. And Snodgrass said, I'm fed up with people who say, boo-hoo, somebody stole my myths. So I thought that would go very well to the tune of Somebody Stole My Gal, and this was the result. Somebody stole my myths, stole all their gists and piths. Somebody pinched my Juno and Pan, crooked Dionysus, and caused my spiritual crisis. Some no good, no account, made my centaur dismount. Some bugger in a laboratory coat with test tube in hand mixed nitrogen with glycerin and poof went the promised land. Oh, hear me crying, don't much like forever dying. Somebody stole my myth.